Ladies and gentlemen, friends gathered here today, there is a truth I must share with you, a truth that challenges the very foundation of what many have accepted without question. For too long, the practice of tithing has been presented as an unquestionable virtue, a sacred obligation, an immutable law handed down through generations. But I stand before you to say that it is time we face this matter with courage and clarity. Tithing, as it has been enforced, is not a virtue but a sin. And to say this is not to provoke division, but to call forth the light of reason and justice upon a tradition that has long overshadowed the dignity and freedom of many. We must begin by asking ourselves why we accept certain practices without scrutiny. When something becomes so ingrained in our culture and faith, it is easy to follow it blindly, assuming that its origin must be just and its effects pure. Yet history teaches us that not all traditions serve the common good. Some bind us in chains disguised as blessings. The practice of tithing, demanding a fixed portion of one's earnings as an obligatory offering, often enforced with fear or shame, must be examined through the lens of conscience and critical thought. We live in an age where freedom and human dignity are the highest pursuits. Yet, how can one claim to be free when compelled to part with a portion of their hard-earned livelihood, sometimes to the detriment of their own well-being or that of their family? True faith, true devotion, should never be shackled by obligation disguised as piety. It is a profound injustice to ask, or even demand, that individuals relinquish what they need for survival and growth, under the pretense that this is an act of worship. Let us not forget the power of courage, the courage to question, to stand against norms that no longer serve justice. Courage is not rebellion for the sake of rebellion. It is the strength to seek truth, to protect the vulnerable, and to uphold the dignity of every person. To challenge the established notion of tithing is an act of bravery, for it confronts institutions and traditions that often wield great influence and authority. We must be clear. Questioning tithing is not questioning faith itself. It is rather an affirmation of faith in its purest form, faith that comes from the heart, free from coercion, and expressed through genuine generosity. Faith that uplifts rather than confines. True spirituality invites us to give freely, to share from abundance, not from fear or compulsion. Consider the stories of those burdened by obligatory tithing, people who struggle to put food on the table, who sacrifice their basic needs to meet an imposed quota. Is this the justice we seek? Is this the compassion that faith teaches us? I say no. We must not allow sacred practices to become tools of exploitation, draining the vitality of the very communities they claim to nurture. In the quiet moments of reflection, we must ask, what is the true purpose of giving? Is it to uphold a rigid rule, or to foster love, support, and solidarity? If it is the latter, then we must free giving from the bonds of obligation and transform it into an act of empowerment. This transformation requires us to think critically and act boldly. It requires us to dismantle the systems that perpetuate inequality under the guise of religious duty. The power of a people lies not in blind obedience, but in the strength of their conviction, their ability to discern what is just and what is not. Let us summon this strength together. Let us create a space where giving is a choice, a joyous expression of solidarity and hope, not a source of burden or fear. By embracing this truth, we honor the spirit of freedom that moves us all. We honor the dignity of every human being who labors and dreams and deserves to live without the chains of imposed obligation. We stand not against faith, but for a higher form of faith, a faith that liberates rather than confines, that heals rather than divides. Let us walk forward with courage, questioning not out of doubt, but out of love. Love for ourselves, for our communities, and for the future we want to build. The path ahead demands of us this bravery, this commitment to justice, and this unwavering belief in the power of free and compassionate giving. The time to break these chains is now. My friends, as we continue this journey of reflection, let us turn our attention to something deeply personal and profoundly important: the freedom and integrity of the individual soul. There is a sacred right within each of us, the right to choose, the right to act according to our own conscience and convictions. This right is not granted lightly. It is the very foundation of our dignity and our humanity. Yet, when it comes to the matter of tithing, this freedom is too often compromised, restrained by unseen chains of expectation, obligation, and sometimes even fear. Imagine a world where every act of giving springs not from pressure, not from duty, but from a place of genuine love and conviction. This is not a distant dream, but the highest calling of our spiritual and moral lives. Giving, when free and voluntary, is an act of empowerment, not only for the receiver, but for the giver as well. It is a profound expression of trust in ourselves, in our communities, and in the sacred bond that connects us all. But when tithing becomes an imposed burden, it strips away this freedom. It converts what should be a joyous and heartfelt gift into a transaction dictated by rules and enforced by authority. This shift diminishes the giver's integrity and reduces the act of giving to a mere obligation, something to be fulfilled out of fear or guilt rather than genuine generosity. And in doing so, it wounds the spirit. True faith, true devotion, cannot and should not be measured by the size of one's offering, but by the sincerity of one's heart. When we are compelled to give a fixed portion, regardless of our circumstances, we lose sight of this truth. The value of giving lies not in the amount, but in the intention behind it. It is the freedom to give that breathes life into the act, making it meaningful and transformative. This is why the insistence on tithing as an obligation is so deeply troubling. It imposes a one-size-fits-all rule on people whose situations vary widely. Some are struggling just to survive, others have more than enough. To demand a strict portion from all, without regard to individual realities, is to ignore the diversity of human experience and to impose hardship where compassion is needed. Moreover, this enforced giving often places the power in the hands of institutions rather than individuals, creating a dynamic where spiritual authority can be wielded to compel financial contributions. This power imbalance is dangerous. It risks turning faith into a system of control rather than liberation. It risks silencing the voice of the individual conscience and replacing it with the dictates of an external authority. We must ask ourselves, where is the space for personal integrity in such a system? Where is the room for the quiet, sincere whisper of the heart that says, I give because I want to, because I believe in this cause, because it brings me joy and fulfillment? This space must be preserved and cherished. It is the birthplace of authentic generosity, the soil from which true community grows. Freedom is not simply the absence of chains. It is the presence of choice, the ability to act according to one's deepest values and beliefs. When we protect this freedom, we protect the very essence of what it means to be human. To deny this freedom is to deny the soul its rightful place in the world. And so I urge you all to reflect on the nature of your giving. Let it be a reflection of your own spirit, not the result of imposed rule. Let your generosity flow from abundance, not from fear. Let it be a light that shines from within, not a duty performed under pressure. This is not a call to abandon faith or community. On the contrary, it is a call to deepen our faith, to strengthen our communities by fostering trust and respect for individual conscience. When giving is free, it unites rather than divides. It builds bridges of understanding and compassion rather than walls of resentment or obligation. In honoring the freedom and integrity of each person, we create a foundation for a more just and compassionate society, one where generosity is not coerced but celebrated, where every gift is aid. Testament to love and choice, not to fear and compulsion. Let us remember that true giving honors the giver as much as the receiver. It honors the sacred right within each of us to decide how, when, and why we give. It is this freedom that nourishes the soul and strengthens the bonds that hold us together. So, let us stand firm in this conviction. Let us cherish and defend the freedom of choice in all acts of generosity, recognizing it as the cornerstone of true faith and true community. Freedom in giving is not just a privilege, it is a right that we must protect with all our might. My friends, as we gather to reflect deeply on the practice of tithing, we must not overlook a crucial truth that demands our urgent attention: the issue of justice and equality. For too long, the conversation around tithing has been framed as a simple act of faith or devotion, yet beneath the surface lies a troubling reality. The system of compulsory tithing, far from being a neutral or purely spiritual matter, often acts as a force that perpetuates inequality and injustice within our communities. We must ask ourselves honestly, who benefits from this system? Who bears the burden? When a fixed portion of income is extracted as a tithe, regardless of a person's circumstance, it disproportionately impacts those who are already struggling. For the wealthy, it may be a small sacrifice, barely noticed. But for those living on the edge of poverty, it can mean the difference between feeding a family or going hungry, between access to education or being forced to drop out, between hope and despair. This is the heart of the injustice. A practice that claims to be sacred can, in reality, deepen the wounds of inequality and reinforce structures that keep people trapped in cycles of hardship. How can a system that drains the little resources from the vulnerable be considered just or righteous? It cannot be. When we talk about justice, we are speaking about fairness, about ensuring that every person has the opportunity to live with dignity, to meet their basic needs, and to thrive. Justice demands that we look carefully at systems and traditions, no matter how old or sacred they seem, and ask whether they serve these goals or undermine them. Tithing, as it is often practiced, falls short of this test. By demanding a fixed share of income, it ignores the realities of inequality and fails to take into account the struggles of those who have the least. It assumes a uniform capacity to give that does not exist in the real world. This is not justice. This is a blind imposition that deepens divides. Moreover, the resources collected through compulsory tithing do not always find their way to where they are most needed. Instead, they sometimes enrich institutions and leaders rather than being used to uplift the poor and marginalized. When this happens, the system not only fails the giver, but also fails the wider community. It becomes a mechanism for preserving power and privilege, rather than distributing resources with fairness and compassion. True justice requires transparency, accountability, and a commitment to using resources to support those in need. It requires us to question who controls wealth and how it is shared. It requires us to stand against systems that exploit the poor under the guise of religious duty. In our pursuit of a just society, we must challenge traditions that, even unintentionally, sustain inequality. We must advocate for a model of giving that is rooted in compassion and fairness, a model that recognizes the diversity of our circumstances and responds with flexibility and understanding. Generosity is a virtue to be celebrated, but it must be voluntary and informed by an awareness of justice. Giving out of obligation, especially when it harms those least able to afford it, is a betrayal of the very principles of fairness and kindness that faith should inspire. Communities thrive when their members are supported equitably and when resources flow to empower rather than oppress. We must work toward a vision where generosity strengthens bonds and builds bridges across divides, rather than reinforcing barriers. The fight for justice is not a fight against faith. It is a fight to live faith in its truest and most beautiful form. It is a call to ensure that our spiritual practices reflect the values of equity and dignity that we cherish. We must imagine a future where no one is forced to give beyond their means, where giving is a joyous act of solidarity rather than a burden that deepens hardship. A future where wealth is shared wisely and every person is valued equally. It is in this vision that we find the true meaning of community, one built on mutual respect, care, and the shared responsibility to uplift each other. It is a vision that calls us to question, to act, and to transform. The path to justice requires us to reject systems that perpetuate inequality, even when they are cloaked in tradition or sanctity. It calls us to embrace practices that honor the dignity of every human being and nurture the common good. Let us stand together in this commitment. Let us be the voice for those who cannot speak, and the hands that lift those weighed down by unjust burdens. In doing so, we honor not only our shared humanity, but the highest ideals of faith and justice. Justice demands nothing less than this. My friends, as we reach the heart of this reflection, I want to share with you a vision, one filled with hope, strength, and the power of collective action. We stand at a crossroads where the old ways no longer serve us, and a new path calls us forward. This path is one of compassion, unity, and freedom, a path where generosity is born from the Spirit, not from obligation, where communities rise together, not by demands, but by mutual care and shared responsibility. Too often, the practice of tithing has been framed as a rigid rule, an unchangeable law that divides rather than unites, that weighs heavy on the shoulders of individuals instead of lifting them up. But imagine, if you will, a different way, a way where giving is a choice embraced with joy and gratitude, where each person offers what they can, when they can, without fear or compulsion. This is not merely a dream. It is a vision grounded in the very essence of humanity and the deepest truths of our shared existence. When we release the burden of compulsory giving, we open the door to a new kind of generosity, one that is authentic, vibrant, and transformative. This generosity is not measured by strict percentages or enforced quotas, but by the willingness of hearts to share in the spirit of love and solidarity. It is an offering that flows freely, not forced by law or expectation, but inspired by the bonds that connect us as human beings. This kind of giving creates communities that are stronger, more resilient, and more compassionate. When people give because they want to rather than because they must, they are more engaged, more committed, and more joyful. Their gifts carry with them a deeper meaning, an expression of hope, of trust, of shared destiny, and in this spirit, generosity becomes a powerful force for healing and renewal. We have seen throughout history that true change comes not from mandates, but from movements powered by the people, fueled by collective hope and action. When communities take ownership of their destiny, when they decide together how to share their resources, how to care for one another, miracles happen. The weak are strengthened, the divided are united, and the impossible becomes possible. Let us imagine communities where no one is forced to give beyond their means, where the emphasis is on what each person can freely offer to support the common good. In such communities, giving is not a burden but a celebration, a way of acknowledging our interconnectedness and our responsibility to one another. This vision calls us to trust in one another, to believe that when we remove coercion, generosity will flourish. It calls us to create systems that are transparent and accountable, where resources are shared fairly, and where the focus is on uplifting every member of the community. In this new model, the power lies not in imposing rules, but in nurturing relationships. It invites us to listen deeply to one another's needs and capacities, to respond with empathy and respect, and to work together to build a future where no one is left behind. The hope we carry is not naive. It is rooted in the enduring strength of the human spirit, the spirit that has overcome oppression, hardship, and injustice time and again. It is a spirit that knows that when we come together with open hearts and open hands, we can build a world where generosity is a source of joy and connection, not fear and division. We are called to be architects of this future, to lay down the foundations of a community where giving is free and abundant, where every act of generosity is a seed planted for growth and healing. This is the future we must strive for. A future where no one is burdened by unfair demands, where every gift is honored, and where every person feels valued and empowered. Let us be inspired by this vision. Let it move us beyond the constraints of the past and into a new era of hope and shared responsibility. Let us recognize that the strength of our communities lies not in rigid rules, but in the willingness of each person to contribute freely, out of love and commitment to the well-being of all. This is the promise of our time, that together we can create a world where generosity unites us, where compassion guides us, and where freedom in giving is the foundation of a just and thriving society. Let us walk boldly into this future, hand in hand, hearts open, ready to give and ready to receive. The future belongs to those who give freely.